Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Gary Halverson, Senior Vice President of Agronomy here at CHS. This is our third in a series of around the table discussions about ag topics that we think you might find some relevance or be important to you and your businesses. Today, we're going to focus on the business of crop inputs and topics and issues surrounding that. We know that return on investment is always the most important thing. What we pay is one component of crop inputs, but certainly what they do for us in field and the yield that they help provide to us and for us is really what we're trying to do by getting the most out of every ton and every gallon that we apply. Today's discussions, I think you'll find to be lively and topical. We have with us three experts in various areas that work every day to add value to CHS and the system. The first person I'll introduce on our panel is Tim Swanson. Tim is a master agronomist for us here at CHS. He has spent his career focused on helping farmers achieve the most in terms of yield and crop production. Been with the company since 2008 and has served in various capacities throughout the upper Midwest and now nationally. So welcome, Tim. We appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it too. Looking forward to visiting with everybody.
Great. Next up is our scientist, Steve Carlson, serves as Director of Technical Services for CHS. Steve joined CHS when we acquired West Central. He was with that organization and has continued to grow his career. Steve deals with a family of products that are all around nutrient enhancement, making sure that we pair the right products with the right fertility to get the most out of those. And as I said, Steve has an interesting background in science. Steve is an expert when it comes to technical support for adjuvants, crop nutrients, and crop protection products. And so we're really pleased that you could join us today. Steve, thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary, for the introduction. Look forward to visiting with everyone today on the call.
Perfect. Hopefully we can test their in-field knowledge with the questions that come from the audience today. And last but certainly not least is Will Stafford. He is one of our representatives from our Washington, D.C. office. Will works for us in regard to all things lobby, important in the key areas for CHS. Will had previously been with Senator Pat Roberts of Kansas and on the staff there and worked on the 2018 Farm Bill and played an important role in helping get that piece of legislation written. And before that, he served on the board and government affairs for the National Association of Wheat Growers. And so Will comes to us with an accomplished track record of lobbying in Washington and a great partner and has a host of interesting perspectives given his role with the company on behalf of agriculture and CHS. So Will, thank you very much for being a part of today's event.
Thanks for having me and looking forward to being here.
Perfect. Well, for everybody that's joining us out in America, we've got a few questions just to get this thing started. On the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A button. That is question and answer. We would ask that you type in any questions you have into that chat panel. I will try and grab them and read them as best I can for the purposes of our esteemed panel to answer. And then you can put those in anytime during the course of today's discussion, and we'll grab them and I'll periodically slide those in during the course of today's discussion. So with that, I think we'll begin. So Mr. Swanson, I have a question for you just so we can get level set. And given your expertise has really been in the field for most of your career, and I'm going to ask you a big, broad question, so it's a bit unfair, but we'll just begin by saying what's going on in the field today and what are crop conditions like?
Okay, yeah, that's a broad question, although I think everybody's looking for water right now. I think the whole country would agree on that. I primarily work in North Dakota and northern Minnesota. Central North Dakota, western North Dakota is real dry. Wheat crop has been significantly impacted there. Over here on the east side of the state, we're hanging on, but there too, we need rain and we need it right away. So was on a call with my team and just kind of a broad overview there too, Gary. Washington, Idaho, Montana, dry. I think they said Washington is the second driest on record. Southern Minnesota seems to be okay. Again, needs rain. Parts of Wisconsin are dry. Northern Illinois is dry. Southern Illinois is hanging on. They got some rains early. Oklahoma is sitting really good right now as a general statement. Texas got some early rains. They're starting to dry out, as is Kansas, Colorado, and Nebraska.
Yeah, it's is more than just a small talker in the ag community about what's happening, right? We've seen the corn crop in the good to excellent rating slide over the last couple of weeks. Wheat crop, of course, as you said, most of the wheat growing area is in pretty tough shape. But I think the last number I saw, 27% good to excellent, and likely we won't hold that number with the forecast that's in front of us for the wheat crop. So, we do what all good, optimistic agriculturalists do. We quietly pray and we watch to the skies, right? So that's how we operate. Thanks, Tim. Steve Carlson, what do you see in terms of soil conditions, and what should growers be thinking about to optimize performance? Most of the U.S. is or wrapping up side dress, and so corn side dress, and so what should we be thinking about, and what's next?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question, Gary, because we're really hitting the heart of that season for a lot of our major crops. And, as Tim mentioned, we're dry, right? There's a few things happening there, but, one thing that's really on my mind right now is we're really hitting the reproductive window for a lot of our major crops. And really what that means, that's when the hunger really starts. You get the demand for all those nutrients. I always think about zinc, boron, copper, all those things really start once we start getting those reproductive windows. And it goes from just a little bit of a sip to, hey, I'm hungry and I need it now, because we're filling out that grain and doing all that great stuff. So for me, as we're going this season, I think it's kind of managing that crop, making sure, for how things are looking, do I have my micronutrients taken care of? Because most of those are really tied to that grain fill. And in particular, my mind always goes to zinc and boron as really important ones. So thinking about those and that approach, making sure that we're feeding that crop for what we see out there, I think is important. The other part that's really on my mind too is as we move into this season, and as we mentioned, I keep saying it's dry, we have to remember it's not just the crop out in those fields oftentimes, it's also those weeds. And those weeds are also incredibly thirsty. In some cases, they can really compete for that little bit of moisture we have in the soil. So I really encourage to look at managing and making sure that we're not letting anything get too far out of hand. This late in the season, if they are out there, they're probably a little bit bigger than that Coke can or beer can that we may remember for spraying. Hopefully they're smaller when you sprayed them the first time. But also too, in those tougher conditions, those weeds are just exponentially more difficult to control. They're hardened off, they're tough, it's dry, it's going to take those droplets and dry them out really quickly. So I really think it's important to make sure we're managing with good spray practices, controlling those weeds, the correct herbicides with what we're looking at. And then I really think the selection of adjuvants is really important, right? Are we using a surfactant to make sure we're cleaning that leaf surface? Are we using water conditioners to overcome antagonism in that spray tank? Are we using a pH buffer, right? One thing that I think is oftentimes overlooked is if your water's not at the right pH, you lose the solubility and efficacy of that herbicide you're going to spray. So there's lots of things, and we're really in that critical time frame where we're going to make that grain. And I think it's important to not lose sight and make sure we're doing all the right management things.
Thank you, Steve. Interesting aside to what you're talking about in terms of heat, not just drought, but heat. Kevin Doyle, who serves on our crop nutrients sales team, as a leader there, it was in the office this week, and he was saying in southern Minnesota, where they grow peas destined to be canned, right? So table peas, that early on the farmer had recounted that this may be the best stand of peas he's ever seen. A good crop is like 2,500 pounds, and the farmer said this could be 5,000 or 6,000 pounds of peas, like it's just going to be a record. But we had 100 degrees when those peas were flowering, and we ended up with the subpar pea set and pod set, and so the farmer actually tilled it under. It went from being, that much potential to that much potential loss. So preserving moisture and doing everything we can do in terms of weed control has to be, top of mind to make sure the plant gets the fuel and feed it needs to produce. Will Stafford in Washington, what's happening today and what's going on and what's affecting growers and cooperatives in particular as we approach planning and what's topical on the Hill?
Yeah, sure. There's certainly a lot going on in agriculture in DC, and we've seen with President Biden coming into office and Democrats controlling both the House and the Senate. There's certainly been a renewed focus on climate policies and conservation, and we've seen that with the Biden administration right off the bat with an executive order that some folks on the line may have heard about called the 30 by 30 plan, where they're trying to conserve 30% of land and water by the year 2030. We've also seen it in the last week or so with the Biden EPA announcing that they're going to look at once again the waters of the U.S. WOTUS that folks may have recalled under the Obama administration that the Trump administration rescinded and rewrote. The Biden EPA is looking to probably rewrite the Trump rule at something close to in the middle of where it was between the Trump rule and where it was under the Obama administration. But that's certainly something that farmers should be concerned about, what that might mean for their spraying practices and what constitutes a navigable body of water on their land, especially in areas like the prairie pothole region. We saw under the Obama rule, it was close to 90% or more of the farmland in the prairie pothole region would have qualified under that. In addition, we see Congress really being interested in climate policy as well, especially carbon. We've seen this. There's a piece of legislation that just an hour ago today actually passed through the Senate called the Growing Climate Solutions Act that aims to break down barriers for farmers to participate in carbon markets. And it would set up a greenhouse gas technical assistance provider program and a third-party verification program at USDA for that carbon sequestration. Like I said, it just passed the Senate today. It has strong bipartisan support over there. There is a companion bill in the House, but it's a little slower moving through the House. And we actually had our board of directors in town, or I should say virtually in town this week with members of Congress to discuss that and a host of other issues. USDA has gotten very involved in looking at supply chain issues that agriculture is facing. They took comments from groups such as National Council of Farmer Co-ops and Ag Retailers Association that we're members of. And some of these comments discuss the importance of fertilizers and biostimulants and other inputs that farmers rely on and how supply chains need to stay strong, even through issues like COVID, so that they can have all those inputs when they need it. And then, lastly, before I move on, we're always looking at the regulatory environment. It definitely looks like we might be looking at a regulatory environment that's closer to what we had under the Obama administration than what we had under the last 4 years under President Trump. We all remember last June when a court last minute rescinded. There was the Ninth Circuit Court rescinded EPA's dicamba product registration and the troubles that caused last minute in an important time of year for dicamba. And we're certainly looking and keeping our eyes open for continued issues like that as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I think, waters of the U.S. has the potential to be extremely disruptive. I remember, this is just anecdote, but I remember early in my career getting in a sprayer when I was in ag retail, get in the sprayer to go spray pre-harvest Roundup on wheat, normal application, and it was a quarter of land. And by the time I had got done spraying the headlands and all around the little sloughs, I had 80 acres sprayed, just making one trip around the field because of the number of wetlands that I was dealing with. That's a field that would be almost unfarmable under the WOTUS rules as they stand or were originally drafted. So that's someplace you can you can count on CHS spending time, and we'll be partnering with Will and our staff in Washington to make sure our voice is heard on behalf of greater broadacre production agriculture. So I appreciate that, Will, and thank you for that. Will, as an aside or an addendum, if I might, when it comes to the infrastructure bill, the trillions of dollars that this administration wants to put in, is some of that geared to at supply chain issues that support agriculture, or how does the administration talk about that infrastructure bill as it relates to our industry?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of moving parts with that infrastructure bill. The original Biden proposal was, I think it was almost $3 trillion, and a huge proposal that only about a third of it was dedicated to your classic infrastructure, your roads, bridges, ports, things like that. Since then, mostly Senate Republicans in the White House have been going back and forth. They've been a long ways from each other on the dollar figures for what that proposal might look like. But I know that there is a bipartisan group in the Senate led by a couple more moderate senators from each side of the aisle that have been trying to get a deal with the White House. And it sounds like today they might actually be close for one that's about, I think it's about a little less than $600 billion. So there might not be anything directly for agriculture in that bill. But with that being said, obviously the dollar figures for roads, bridges, things like that are vitally important. And I think it is possible that we might even see some help on the broadband side of things as well, which farmers obviously need for their precision tools and just doing business in today's high-tech environment.
Yeah, thanks for that, Will. I certainly hope that some of $1 trillion ends up on the locks and dams and the river systems that support America, both in grains and fertilizers. Gentlemen, so for all of you, and Tim, maybe you want to start first here, and we'll maybe go around the horn. And Will brought this up, but how are farmers responding to conversations about carbon and input use? What do you hear from the farm community, and what should we be thinking about with carbon? Because it's gotten to be almost as topical for us as COVID was just not long ago. So what do we hear about carbon?
I think there's excitement, but I think there's a lot of unknowns, right? Even kind of the measurement, what's that mean? What's the opportunity? But I haven't heard anything negative yet, and I think there's a great opportunity maybe to add some revenue on those farms. Overall, growers do the right thing. That land is their legacy. It's their pride. And then obviously it's a revenue. So good farming practice, kind of ironic, right? You hear a lot in the media about some of this stuff. Agriculture thinks the same way about sustainability and things like that. We just approach it from an ROI and operationally and things like that. So.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. Steve, Will, any comments about carbon?
Yeah, I can take a swing at that one, Gary. I know for me, I'll reiterate some of what Tim says. I think there's a lot of excitement. Anytime that you can open a new opportunity, whether you're a grower or working in agriculture, to generate revenue based on a lot of what we're already doing, I think that's a tremendously exciting thing to finally get some recognition there. Now, when I talk to most growers or work with customers within our network or customer base at CHS, a lot of questions come around, well, how do I get started, or what are things that I can get rewarded for? So I think there's just a lot of, helping define, where can I start? How can I make it easy and simplistic where it fits into the things I'm doing today, or, minor tweaks I can make on the farm that make a difference? And then who can I go to really help kind of guide down that path and be a trusted partner? With, the markets today, I think it's a little bit of the Wild West per se. There's lots of different things that you can go, but there's not a clear defined path, right? And as we look at kind of the market, what is the value of that carbon, and how much are these practices or products or different things that we're doing on the farm, how do they create that carbon ton that's the value piece? And I'm really excited because I think as time continues, we'll understand that better and better and be able to get more of a grasp. And I think with a lot of the different things happening, both, socially as well as, regulatory wise coming down the pipe, I think there's opportunities for that carbon value and what those growers are doing, what the retailers are doing to really, have an opportunity to profit from, as well as get rewarded for what they're doing. So I think it's exciting. We're going to continue to look at it in a couple of different ways and see what can we do to help make it easy, flexible, and something that they can really adopt and embrace.
Thanks, Steve.
And I would just add, there's a lot of excitement in DC, and obviously carbon's a huge issue that people are talking about constantly here in just about every meeting I'm in. And I already mentioned that Growing Climate Solutions Act that's moving its way through Congress. And to Steve's point, about it kind of being the Wild West out there, and farmers need to have trusted voices of who to talk to. There's a lot of hope that this piece of legislation might help address that with the third-party technical assistance program, where companies could be those technical advisors to growers to help them switch to some of those carbon reducing practices, as well as the third-party verification certification program, which would be USDA certified, where third-party entities could be those groups that go out there and say, yes, this practice, reduced this much carbon. Here's what the credits would hopefully mean. With that being said, like I mentioned already, we were meeting with members of Congress with our board the last couple of days, and we brought these issues up to them. And we did stress that, there is a lot of excitement for farmers with these programs, but any program should still remain voluntary, not mandatory. In addition, we've been stressing that it needs to be equitable across regions and crops. Some practices on one crop in one region might have a very different carbon sequestration amount than it would on a different crop in a different part of the country. And then lastly, we want to make sure that farmers that were early adopters of some of these practices and have been doing them for years are fairly compensated for that as well. And they're not just penalized because they already made the reduction that some farmers haven't made yet as these new programs emerge.
Yeah, thanks, Will. An interesting note about the Growing Climate Solutions Act. I think I said that correctly.
Correct, yeah.
That bit of legislation is going to be administered by the USDA, even though we all recognize that the carbon dioxide or carbon issue is really an environmental issue, and the EPA should be weighing in on it. And yet they've allowed, the arms of agriculture to be the administrator of the program because, frankly, they're looking to all of us to help solve the issue. They realize that more legislation and more regulation from the EPA won't push a farmer toward helping sequester carbon and correcting some of what people call climate change or the carbon dioxide issue in the environment. So that's an interesting wrinkle of how they were actually, a bit thoughtful. And I hope that means that it won't be part of the Farm Bill and be a mandate, but be more of a something that we can help legislate proactively and frankly, with a lot of common sense as we work with farmers. So that's our hope, right, Will?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we have been pushing for this piece of legislation to be passed. And like I said, we got some good news in literally the last hour that it did pass through the Senate. It was a vote of 92-8. So very, very, very strong support there. You don't see that a whole lot these days. And looking for it to move through the House, it has a few hangups there that we still need to work our way around. But we would like to see it pass, and we have made it clear that once it goes to USDA to be implemented, we'd like a seat at the table to make sure that it works well for our growers.
Thank you, Will. I have a question that came into our Q&A box, and I'll remind everybody that we're certainly here to answer your questions and do our very best to provide quality answers. So whatever is on your mind, don't hesitate to type it into the Q&A box, and we'll bring it to the panel here today. So for Tim and Steve, what do these dry conditions mean for crop nutrient uptake and future crop needs? What does all of this mean today and tomorrow? So Tim, do you want to take a first swing at it, please?
Sure, I'll start and Steve can finish, shore me up. That's really interesting. And one of the guys I work with in his fertility presentation, he has a slide that says plants don't eat their food, they drink it. Right. So a lot of what Steve was talking about was, this might be an opportunity for foliars to kind of get us that little bridge over the top, maybe shore some things up. I think that's very useful at these times. We see the wheat right now is finishing out early. It's saying, I'm running out, I'm going to get done. It's amazing how these crops adapt, right? I think we'd all agree on that. I would make a call out on that too. Those weeds are doing the same thing. They don't have any excess. Timings that you're used to might accelerate a little bit, might come a little sooner. I know I've seen some pictures already of, water hemp throwing seeds way earlier than it should in some of my areas. So, definitely going to be crucial here on how we manage, like Steve said earlier, that grain fill now as we head into this important time of year. Steve, I'll hand it up to you.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, really, there's kind of two paths I see with drier conditions and crop nutrition, kind of what happens for uptake and different needs. I would say for any of the crops that had, a good fertility base, had a good plan going into the season, they're probably still in a great position where the hunger's there, right? They have the opportunity, because a big piece with crop nutrition is it does a lot with buffering against the stresses that you have of the season. Heat, cold, drought, different things, a well-fed and positioned crop can buffer those better, right? So I think it holds the opportunity for things that start out with a good base to continue to do so and hold out for some timely rains and finish things out. For the ones that maybe didn't start out with the best base, where Tim's talking about some of the wheat heading out very soon. We've seen that with extreme drought conditions. They're kind of shutting down, and some of those windows are passing. So I would say, like I said, there's two roads, right? And if you were looking at the crop and it looks fairly decent right now, and you had a good plan going into the season on what my goals were, what I'm going to do for nutrient management, my units of N, my units of P, what I want to do, I think it's still a great opportunity to continue to push that crop and make sure we're feeding that need. And maybe for the ones that are a little bit tougher in those conditions, that window may have passed for some. So again, it's not the best situation, but there's a couple different options we have, because again, I'm such a fan of good nutrition, because again, think about yourself, right? If you're well-fed, hydrated, you can go run that race, you can go to the gym, you can do stuff. If you're hungry, tired, thirsty, I'm not as productive. I don't think any of us are, right? And that's really where it's the same story for that crop, right? And I'm hoping with some of us here looking at the season, we can go ahead and give that orange slice in that halftime period to finish the game. And that's really what I look at here.
Great analogy, Steve. I'm sure a lot of folks here in Central Time at 12:26, it's about lunchtime. They're probably curious. We're talking about food and feeding. They're probably wondering what's next themselves. So that's, I think, very topical. And I when I was in ag retail, I would often say that for anyone to be as productive as they can, we have to have balanced nutrition, and that's really what we're talking about for the plant as well. And Tim, thanks a lot for the comment about plants don't eat their food, they drink it. I think that's easy to overlook, right? It's the roots and the root hairs, the root fibers that do the heavy lifting for us, and they have to be viable. They have to be wet in a way that they can uptake the food for the plant. The team, another note came in the Q&A. Will supply chain disruptions continue to affect crop protection products availability? And so for the audience, this question is likely born from spring experiences where we had in excess of 200 different products by brand, more than 100 AIs or active ingredients that were somehow impaired or supply constrained. So would anybody like to take a swing at crop protection supply chains being disrupted? How do we finish the season? And then what do we think about 2022?
I can certainly try and take a swing at that for the group and short
Please.
up. Yeah, when I look at crop production and the supply chain, I think what the last 18 months has brought out is just how intertwined everything is. I joke, but Tim and I were even on the phone talking this morning about the future and kind of how things are so tied together. When we look at the supply chain moving forward, I think that the industry is going to do a couple different things. We're looking to get planning sooner and ahead of time in the season to really mitigate. When we look at the global network, we've got raw materials coming internationally, globally, that really kind of affect things. That's starting to improve a little bit with, COVID vaccinations going out, different things there. But we also have it where, we're behind, right? There's going to be a little bit of a catch-up period. The other part that I think really comes into play is, just kind of what we had with the Black Swan event. I know personally, and working on making sure we had our products in the shed when we had the freeze in the south towards that Houston area, that really damaged a lot of the key raw materials. And we're seeing that continue through. So I really expect, the supply chain will do its best to get ahead of things, and planning is going to be utmost important. Making those last minute decisions, I don't think is going to cut it for the next 18 months. It's really going to be that forward thinking and planning that's going to be key. Can we guarantee that everything's going to be okay across the industry? Absolutely not, right? That's just not going to happen. But I think that the industry is really looking forward to saying, how can we mitigate or reduce those stresses long term and really get things back to where they were? I think that 2022, we're still going to feel some of this stuff, and it's being really resourceful, opportunistic, understanding where you can fit, what you can substitute, how you can work through things. That'll be really pivotal. And that's really where I've seen some great groups of customers, as well as this team, step up to help make and mitigate any of those issues we saw in the supply chain.
Thank you, Steve. Tim, did it cause any problems in field where we were short on key products?
Well, it took a lot more managing than normal, right? Normally we can just walk up to the pallet and grab what we want for the most part. We had to be a lot more in communication with growers. I saw the agronomists out there in communication ahead of time, could either get substitutions. Luckily, actually, some of these were taken care of because of the drought. We were already concerned about maybe some carryovers for next year and switch some chemicals out that way and move them, here to there. I think with even with these dry conditions, we got to be concerned about, potential disease. Up here, I think the wind has blown, 20, 30 miles an hour for 45 days. So we have beat the tar out of these plants. We've opened them up wide open. If there's any disease out there, I think that's going to be so. Fungicides will be important. With the mild winter, I think we better be concerned about insects too. So, this isn't over just as we're through the herbicide season, and we've got to be prepared for what's next and have alternatives. Don't let yourself get back into a corner.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'll just speak on behalf of what our crop protection team is working on for 2022, which Steve, I think, articulated a lot of it. And practically speaking, our sales folks are out working with ag retailers, doing forecasts monthly, every couple of months. Those forecasts roll up to active supply planning. And we're benefited that we've had such a wonderful, robust spray season. So the warehouses are in more of an empty position, and we're going to utilize that floor space to benefit the system and try and do our best to place the right herbicides, the right active ingredients, the right adjuvants, surfactants, and try and mitigate this going into 22 by early and aggressive planning. And here at CHS, we're really proud to say that we've got a strong balance sheet. So investing in inventory doesn't stress the company in a way that jeopardizes anything. We're able to do that on behalf of the owners and on behalf of the American farmer. So it's a proud position to have, but it takes a lot of legwork by the men and women on the agronomy team to get it right. But it's work worth doing, looking at what Steve and Tim talked about, what's going on in the field and at the warehouse level. So, team, how can growers profitably engage in sustainable agriculture? And I think that word profitably is interesting. Tim talked about kind of the heart and soul of the farmer in regard to how they feel about the land, but how do we think about it profitably?
I'll give that one a shot first here. That's another interesting statement, right? There's been a lot of talk the last 5 years about cover crops and some of the benefits, and some of that's hard to measure. But I see a lot of cover crops going in, even in places now on top of corn, and it's just for soil erosion. So it's sort of an unforeseen benefit that way. There's talk about green manure, and there's talk about retaining that moisture. And working with some growers, or I see more and more, strip till and things like that, managing inputs, managing that moisture, things like that. So, and I think there's a lot of ways. I can't, say here's a dollar figure, because I think we're all trying to work that out. Some cover crops offer some weed resistance, and we choke some of that stuff out, and some do it naturally. So maybe some unforeseen benefits that all couple together to bring some value.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, I think those are all good. When I kind of think about that question, I always think about where my mind goes, and maybe it's just me, but it's really creating that plan for the entire season. And for me, when it starts with fertility and soil testing, right? If I don't understand where that field sits, that ground that I'm managing or looking to grow, and where I want to bring it to a yield goal or target, you're flying blind, right? And that's starting with understanding what I have within that field can really help make those management decisions to say, where do I want to go and how am I going to get there? So I really think that that's a big part of the profitability aspect, because it sets the foundation for, financially, I want to produce this many bushels to be this profitable as an organization. And then you got to know your fertility, because that's your founding feature that gets you there. And then really start basing that management decision. The other part that I think is really important that ties into that is, if I'm going to make an application, whether it's herbicide, fungicide, fertility, nutrients, every time I'm going across that field, I want to be more efficient, right? Use an adjuvant to help with the better activity. Make sure if I'm doing nitrogen, it's at the right time. Am I stabilizing it so I'm not losing 80% of it to the environment? I mean, I think that's very important. If I'm going to put down phosphorus, am I going to do banded applications to get closer to that root zone and feed that beast? Or am I going to make sure that when I'm putting it out there, I'm doing something to help enhance the efficiency of that phosphorus? There's so many things that I think come into play. And again, I think that mantra is just overall, how do I bring more efficiency? And I don't know a grower or a retailer or anyone that works in ag that doesn't get excited or think that bringing more efficiency to the farm is a good thing or a bad thing, right? We want to make sure we're doing that.
Yeah, I think with that family of products, right, when you talk about nutrient enhancement or efficiency products, it's fascinating because it's one of the only places I can point to it very easily and say that, the channel and the ag retailer can find profit in it, certainly, but the farmer finds profit in it easily too. It's easily measured, right? And it's one of the first things we tend to leave out, but at the end of the day, it has a return because of what it helps the plant produce, and we can prove that. So thanks for that, Steve. Steve, I'm gonna go off script just a little bit. What do we have in the pipeline? mean, I think we've got, a host of folks here online that might be curious about what's next in product development and what do we think the future, what direction are we pointing our investments in product development? And that's a bit of a leading question, but I think folks would be interested to know.
Absolutely. That's my favorite subject. And that's one thing that I really love doing here and with the team at CHS. Hands down, when we look at our strategy when it comes to bringing products in that CHS box to you guys as customers, it's really centered around, hey, what can we do to make sure that's agronomic? And it's something that you're asking for. The work we do in listening to customers, working with our sellers, working with our team to decide those products that come to market is a great thing. And really what I'm excited for is one of the things that we've been working on for years is around our Soy Enhanced Portfolio. And this is really a cool story because it brings a far better agronomic product, but it also helps in our handling and a couple different things. And what that's doing is pretty simple. It's taking refined soybean oil that we produce, crushing the canola plants, the soybean oil at our facilities, and utilizing it in the adjuvant portfolio. What this does is, most adjuvants or products that we use in that herbicide space, they're crude. And to the word crude, there's stuff in there. Refined is really cool where it's completely a very clean product and it allows for better flowability and better end use on the product. So we've seen this in a number of products over the years. CHS Accuvent, Petrichor have been great examples historically. And now we're really excited with our pipeline to bring more of those products that utilize that technology. So we've got some products here. Taprin is going to be one here where it will be that MSO combined with that soybean oil combined with talamine, which is going to be a really exciting one that I think is going to help bring some better efficacy to those oil applications. When you're using those burn down herbicides, desiccation type applications, really bringing some value. The other ones that I think are pretty exciting as well is going to be utilizing some not newer molecules, but really proven molecules with talamine and different ingredients to further expand and bring some exciting new products to the market for those herbicide applications. Another one that I think is going to be very interesting as well is expanding upon our nutrient enhancement platform. Product development continues to work on products to say, how can we bring greater efficiency to crop nutrition? And what we're going to have that's going to be very exciting in this coming year is going to be our Moxon family of foliar products, utilizing the CHS patented Levosol technology. And what this does is it makes more of those nutrients that we're applying more available, which is going to be a very exciting thing moving forward. Again, we're working on stuff that's just what's coming out in the coming year. And when we look at that strategy, we're looking multiple years out. So again, there's a few things that are in the works that I can't talk about right now, but they are continuing to be in development to bring that next generation of products to the CHS lineup.
And, I think proudly the team is trying to get from 6 to 10 new products in the pipeline and working on next generation products and really helping advance those companion products that increase efficacy and return. So it's noble work, and it's work that helps enable, every dollar invested in herbicide or insecticide, fungicide to behave better for the farmer. Tim, I'm gonna hit this, and I'll go to Will with one. We're at that funny time of year where late season weeds or escapees or some of the 27, 28 resistant weeds can be a burden for us in field. What do people do to help solve that problem today? If it's time to spray as we approach the 4th of July, how do we think about, that treatment and what they might do to help solve the problem?
Sure. Well, I guess first I hope that we were thinking about it early, right? We laid down some residuals or something to try and get in front of it. But we'd always know there's those rescue treatments that we have to come. First one comes to mind, depending on crop, but we got Roundup or Liberty out there, is our adjuvant level best. And, Steve kind of talked about the product development team. This was one of the funnest adjuvants that I've ever seen come to market. It just brought glyphosate back to life, really kind of shored up the glufosinate market too. Some of those, just talking to another seller a couple days ago, and every once in a while, just one grower, that glufosinate wouldn't work. It worked for everybody else, right? And it would rotate. So that was exciting. I do want to call out, though, in a world of resistance, level best will not overcome resistance. Okay. We're not saying that, but it does help inject more Roundup in there. We get a lot better control, a lot faster control in those situations where we're up against the wall.
Thanks, Tim. I think that's a great call out, right? It doesn't fix these 27, 28, 29 resistant weeds in a growing population, but if they're hard to kill, it's going to help enhance the efficacy. Will, President Trump proudly took on the Chinese in what he called a phase one trade negotiation, trying to take down tariffs or at least to remediate the issue of tariffs as we export to China or import Chinese goods here, and kind of an imbalance in his opinion. So how do you think we're going to get to phase two? Because President Trump had said phase one in my first term, and I'll get phase two when you reelect me. That part of the plan didn't happen. So where do we go with phase two, and what does that mean for agriculture?
Right. So as you might recall, the phase one agreement was set up to be a 2-year agreement, which we are currently in the second year of, as far as the purchasing agreement for different products, most of them being agricultural products, go. Moving forward, there are mechanisms for the phase one agreement to continue into the future. But I will say to my knowledge, the Biden administration and the Chinese have not expressed any interest thus far in negotiating a quote unquote phase two new agreement. The Biden administration has been conducting what they're calling a review of the current phase one agreement. And this is pretty normal for a new administration when they come in and look at the different agreements that the last one passed. And sometimes pull out of them. You may recall the Trump administration pulled out very quickly from the Paris Climate Accords, the Iran nuclear deal, things like that. And the Biden administration legally could pull out of the China phase one agreement. We've urged them not to, since the agriculture purchasing agreements have been working fairly well right now. Or I should say, we've urged them not to unless the underlying tariff situation that sparked the need for the phase one agreement is addressed first. Those underlying tariffs, the Section 232, we call them, steel and aluminum tariffs, that kind of sparked the ongoing trade war with China and the tariff ramp up, are still technically in place. And if that phase one agreement ends, or one side decides that they're done with the agreement, those tariffs would go back into place unless they're addressed first. So we're trying to kind of fight it on two fronts right now. Say, hey, let's keep this thing going. That's a good thing. But at the same time, we do want to see those underlying tariffs addressed as well.
Thank you, Will. Yeah, we're in a unique position at CHS. We're exporting America's grain, and we're importing fertilizers from the globe to help support production agriculture. So we're on both ends of importing and exporting. And so tariffs and the rules that govern that, the dollars that trade because of that, just of the utmost importance for us, as well as, what's going on with the energy cycles, how's ocean-going freight being handled, and all of the things around the supply chain, as well as the counterparty or the trade party. So there's just a lot that complicates it, but we appreciate your work in Washington. I am going to begin to wrap this up, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us. To my colleagues, Master Agronomist Tim Swanson, Dr. Steve Carlson, and our esteemed colleague, Will Stafford in Washington. Thank you all for your commentary and comments, and thank you for your partnership in doing this. We hope that everybody online that joined us today found some value in what we're doing. We appreciate your business. You're here because you're connected to CHS in a way that's meaningful. And we don't operate without our customers. And we certainly are humbly appreciative of you joining us today and appreciate the business that we do together. So you can hear more about CHS experts every week on our Around the Table program that we're doing here today. You find new episodes at cooperativeownership.com. I'll remind you, as owners of this CHS system, we will be doing owners forums around the country. We're going to do 5 in person where you can hear from CHS leaders, and then 1 additional virtual owners forum. Again, you can find that information on our CHS website. And with that, thank you again, and best wishes. Have a safe and successful growing season, and thank you all for joining us. And with that, have a great day.